Hey, I just want to get on here real quick and say, if you've noticed that some of your favorite large social justice creators aren't speaking out about the genocide of the Palestinian people as a response to the unjust killing of those 1,400 Israelis, it may not be that they're being silent, they may be being stifled. I have tried to post this video a total of about 15 times now between here and Instagram. Each time it's being blocked. This time, they didn't even let it get past 5 seconds before I got an instant community guidelines violation. They are stifling voices. And that's why we are saying that the blood of this tragedy does not just lie on Hamas, the Israeli government, or the American government. It is very much on the hands of the media as well. The news media and social media. They are silencing us. Please go do your own research, guys.
In the next 10 seconds of this video, if you don't get mad as hell, I really don't know what to do about you because you might be inept as a human. Anyway, roll the clip. There's no way you can watch that video and try to justify what Israel is doing. It's not a war. It's not. It's a fucking massacre of the Palestinian people. And not only that, it's trickling down into TikTok trends, encouraging children to be racist and fucking bigots to the Palestinian people. This is absolutely insane, and we are in fucking danger as a human fucking species. I cannot stress this enough.
Oh my God, they said it, holy shit.
I can tell you that we are not targeting anyone else in Gaza but civilians. Hamas is cynically,
Major Freudian slip there. Because they know they're targeting civilians. Refugee camp? Like, how do you explain that? First, I just have to point out this ridiculous headline from the BBC. Dozens reported killed in explosion in northern Gaza refugee camp. Like, what do you mean the refugee camp just exploded? Did it just spontaneously combust? Like, what? Come on. Anyway, it had to be done because Hamas is using Gazans as human shields. They will say that innocent civilian lives are a tragedy of war as apartments, hospitals, and refugee camps are bombed. Fine, but the thing that I always do to see if an argument has any merit is to see if it stands the test of just one additional follow-up question. Just one.
What if Hamas was hiding in Israel? What would the Israeli government do then to eradicate them?
Great question. You could either lie and say, A, they take the same approach, except now the Israeli citizens are the ones who are the human shields and thus are necessary collateral damage. Or B, the inconvenient truth is that Israel, in that case, would have to take a more surgical approach, thus needing to admit that yes, Palestinian lives are simply worth less than Israeli lives. Just the way the chips fall. Of course, ideally, they wouldn't want to say that, and thus this new effort to, quote-unquote, erase the idea that there is such a thing as an innocent Palestinian civilian.
This is a message to Americans. The next time that you hear Genocide Joe talking about evacuating American citizens that are in Gaza, understand this is the reality of what he claims to be evacuating American Palestinian citizens in Gaza. Before I get into it, I want to give you some background about me. I came to the US 9 years ago. I went to college here, and for the past 4 years, I've been working in the US, paying taxes. I have been law-abiding. I have been contributing to my community in the neighborhood that I live in. I have been an excellent employee, and I have made some excellent relationships with other Americans that I have interacted with. So let's get into the Gaza part. The US said that it's evacuating US Palestinian citizens, and we're a minority in Gaza. My father and brother are both US citizens. They hold the US citizenship. And let me put a disclaimer before I start. The whole citizenship thing is very elitist because it's actually horrifying that only a minority gets to leave during a genocide and the 2 million are left without food and without water and without a ceasefire. But in theory, if you are a citizen of a country, in theory, you are guaranteed specific rights and specific protections because you belong to that country technically, at least on paper. So after weeks and weeks of the genocide, the US government put out a form and had US citizens that are in Gaza fill it out. I filled it out for my family and I put my mother's name. My mother is not a US citizen. So when the list came out a few days ago saying X, Y, and Z should evacuate, they only had my father and brother's name. I called the US State Department 7 times. And each time that someone got on the phone with me, by the way, it felt like I was calling customer service at Walmart as if I was a product. The person on the line would tell me the same thing, which is your father and brother should leave their mother and wife in Gaza because this service is only for US citizens. Usually in those cases, the whole family is evacuated as a unit because who is going to leave his spouse alone and which kid is going to leave his mother alone? And I'm going to give you another example of my relative. He is a US citizen and he has 2 daughters, 7 and 12 years old. His daughters are Palestinian citizens. They do not have the US passport. So when he put them on the form, he was also told that he would evacuate and that he would have to leave his little kids behind. And let me tell you, it gets even worse. For the people that have managed to get to Egypt, which it's not that many people, they are only given 72 hours to stay in Egypt. So if you do manage to leave and go to Egypt, you only have 72 hours to stay in the country. And after that, your 2 options is to seek asylum in Egypt, which Egypt doesn't do refugee stuff like that. Like it's not common. Or your second option is to go back to the US or Canada, by the way, because they both have the same policy with this. You go back to the US or Canada, but for a lot of these families, including my own, they don't have a life in the US. Rent is so expensive here, even for me as someone who makes my own income and salary, I'm barely making it as an individual. And they want families to go there and do what? Pay rent how? When no one has money anymore because of what's happening and people can't just get jobs in a foreign country and there are no benefits given to anyone, no protections. Staying in Egypt would be the ideal thing for a lot of families because it's cheaper. But yeah, this is what the US government is doing. They are dehumanizing, and this is the same government that put kids in cages on the US-Mexico border. They separate families and they leave families to make the hardest decisions of their lives, even though we are paying thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a year to be in this country. When we don't have healthcare, when our student loans aren't being paid, when there is a severe drug problem, when there is crazy inflation and rent is extremely, extremely high, we are living in a joke of a world, and people need to wake up to these systems that are oppressing people everywhere, regardless whether they're American citizens or not.
I'm gonna try to do a roundup of everything that Israel did tonight, but I am genuinely losing track of all the massacres and all the acts of terror that they committed. First of all, they bombed the entry to 3 different hospitals in Gaza, and that resulted in a lot of people getting killed and injured because so many people are currently seeking refuge at these hospitals and sleeping on the entry doors. Israel also bombed a school where people were seeking refuge in the north. Earlier yesterday, there were fishermen trying to catch some fish because there is no food, and Israel bombed their boats last night. Israel continues to bomb refugee camps. They bombed the Brej refugee camp, the Nusrat refugee camp, and Jabalia as well. They're targeting a lot of different homes. Israel is also targeting the Red Cross vehicles and ambulances. And if you try to go from the north to the south, Israel also bombs the vehicles that are trying to pass through. I might have missed a lot of other things because honestly there was a stream of news coming tonight, just like every other night. But it seems like each day Israel acts with more and more impunity, and the reason it's doing it is because it never faces any consequences, and there are no restraints on its use of force and its continuous aggression on Gaza and the genocide that it's committing against the Palestinians. I forgot another important update, which is that Israel started bombing solar panels in the north of Gaza as punishment for people who stayed in their homes. That way they will lose electricity. And they also bombed the electricity generators at the hospitals, primarily hospitals like the Shifa hospital, which caused huge fires. It's super important for people who are just now joining this movement to understand that one of Israel's main objectives with its colonization of Palestine is to fragment all the different areas of Palestine, which is why if you see on the news, it's being framed as the Hamas and Israel war or Gaza-Israel war. There is no existence of Palestine in terms of the language that is being used, and that is a very calculated effort to erase Palestine and to erase
displace Palestinians and make it about just one aspect and not the other. I personally haven't done a great job with highlighting things that are going on in the West Bank in East Jerusalem while Gaza is getting bombed, just because my family is there and I'm trying to translate all the news and things that are coming out of Gaza. And I also use the word Gazan to describe Palestinians that live in Gaza. I should be saying Palestinians in Gaza or from Gaza, but I just use it for ease. And I just need people to understand that Israel does this in a very calculated way, and the reason that Gaza is the one that always gets bombed is also very strategic, because then it seems like the problem is just Gaza, you know? Whereas the problem is Israel's settler colonialism and Israel's oppression of the Palestinians everywhere. And the way that they have divided us is very important for them to control us better, because with those divisions and borders and checkpoints, it becomes way harder for Palestinians to exist as a collective physically on their land. And that geographical separation is very effective in terms of separating Palestinians from one another and making it very hard for someone who lives in Gaza to understand the experience of someone who lives in the West Bank and sees the soldiers on the ground, and vice versa, for example. But as Gaza has been getting bombed, Israel arrested more than 5,000 Palestinians. There was also workers who are from Gaza that were in the West Bank because they work there and they come back to Gaza at night. They get permits from Israel to do that. So these laborers were also assaulted, tortured, and arrested by Israel during that first week of the genocide. Israeli soldiers have been shooting at Palestinians in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, and they have been bulldozing entire cities and ruining the infrastructure. They have forcibly displaced more than 1,000 Palestinians, and every night they raid all the different villages and cities in Palestine, specifically targeting refugee camps and arresting Palestinians there and torturing them. The pictures we are seeing and the videos we are seeing are horrifying, and show you the extent to which Israel will go to protect this Zionist, this racist, this fascist state, and that the attacks are not just happening on Gaza, because Gaza is not the only problem for Israel. All Palestinians anywhere on that land are a problem for Israel, because Israel wants to take more and more and more and kill more and more Palestinians.
So, in case you don't know what you're looking at, you are witnessing probably the coolest thing you will ever see in your life, and probably the most profound example of solidarity that I have ever seen. In that 10-second TikTok video that I just did, you just witnessed some actual history being made. Basically, in the port of Oakland, they discovered this military boat that was headed towards Israel to deliver weapons. So here in the Bay, there was a protest to stop the boat. We managed to delay it for about 9 hours and got word that the next stop would be in Tacoma. So a bunch of people showed up to the Tacoma port, 500 people, to stop this boat and make it so it can't dock, it can't load, and it can't undock. And indigenous activists showed up in paddle boats and rowed out into the water to block the boat from being able to get in or out. That is like the coolest thing that I've ever seen. It's like you could not imagine a better textbook example of what solidarity looks like. It is probably the most inspiring and life-changing thing I've ever seen. Like, this is what humanity looks like. This is what the human spirit is like all about. Those assholes in Washington or in state legislatures, they don't get to define humanity. Humanity looks like freezing your ass off in a boat for hours to make sure that the same states that massacred and trode all over the rights of your people does not get to do the same thing to another group of people. And it's just fucking, it's insane. We are on the right side of history, and when they say like Palestine is freeing us, they really fucking mean that shit. The very self-evidential reality is that America and Americans would be a lot better at forcing things like boycott, divest, and sanctions onto Israel if we were unionized, which we are overwhelmingly not. And more importantly, if these unions are newer, if they're not like institutionalized. Because like the Amazon and the Starbucks unions are very active in their stance for Palestine. But unions like AFL-CIO, they have supported Israel. In America, 11.3% of the workforce is unionized. That's fucking tiny in comparison to like other like developed countries. And in America, even the unions that we do have, a lot of them are institutionalized, and so they move the same way that like traditional political systems also move, which tend towards Israel. Unions, and I mean real unions that understand the theory of why unions exist in the first place, are so necessary for moments like these. And it is exactly and precisely because America has been decimated by like right to work legislation that we are so powerless to counter what our government is doing. That's why in Belgium, they can refuse to offload Israeli ships and exports. Meanwhile, over here, in 17 states, it's illegal not to buy Israeli hummus. Like, that's absurd. These intersections actually make a difference.
Israel just arrested the very well-known Ahad al-Tamimi during a nightly raid of her town, Nabi Saleh, in the occupied West Bank. She was arrested for, of course, suspicion of inciting violence and terrorism. She's 22 now, but she initially became well-known back when she was 14, filmed biting an Israeli soldier who was trying to arrest her younger brother. Her brother at that time was 12 years old, wearing a cast, and an Israeli occupation soldier was pushing him down on a rock. And then she became famous in 2017 when she slapped an Israeli soldier in the face. She was sentenced to 8 months in jail for that, and since then she's become a symbol for Palestinian resistance. There's actually a massive mural of her on Israel's separation wall in occupied West Bank. Now, in the West Bank, Israel does what are called overnight raids. In the middle of the night, Israeli occupation forces will storm Palestinian villages and invade Palestinian homes without giving any reasons. With guns in hand, they storm through the front door, force all the family members, the parents, the kids, the grandparents, they force them into one room, oftentimes tying their hands behind their back, then begin trashing the house, completely flipping it upside down, and then arrest one or a number of Palestinians in that home, take them away to some Israeli facility, and then maybe tell the family where they're taking them and why they took them. But usually they don't give reason. Since October 7th, Israel has arrested or really abducted more than 1,700 Palestinians in the West Bank through these popular overnight raids. And this isn't anything new. They've been doing this for decades now. This is allowed to happen because Israel has laws and military orders that allows detention of Palestinians without trial or charge. They'll hold them for 2 days, 2 months, 20 years. It's all been done, more often than not, without trial. So essentially, that is what happened to Ahad. She was arrested during an overnight raid of her village. The most likely reason why they gave justification to her arrest by saying that she is inciting terrorism, they probably only did that because she's high profile and everybody will see it. But for people who are not well known, they just arrest for no reason. In fact, just last week, her father was arrested during an overnight raid, and they haven't heard anything about him since then. For more than a week now, they haven't heard anything from her dad from the system. They have no idea what's going on. They have no idea where he currently is. So important notes to remember. One, Israel uses overnight raids in the West Bank as a tool in their system of apartheid to control Palestinians and terrorize them literally through the night. And two, they strategically, publicly arrest well-known Palestinians who are known for speaking up against the Israeli occupation, to instill fear in the larger Palestinian population and keep them quiet, too scared to speak out. And that's actually why we're not seeing a lot of Palestinians in the West Bank talking about what's happening in Gaza right now on social media. They want to, but they know that as soon as they open their mouth, as soon as they post something on Instagram, they're gonna get arrested. And that's why it's important for us, especially us Palestinians in exile outside of Palestine, to be speaking up and sharing what's happening, because the ones in Palestine can't. So I just got some pretty disturbing news about the Palestinians in the West Bank who are being kidnapped and how they're being kidnapped. A lot of us have seen the update that more than 5,500 Palestinians there have been abducted since the beginning of October. This footage of Palestinian men in the West Bank being tortured and beaten by Israeli soldiers. I can't find any news articles or any coverage of this, so I feel like I have to share this. When I first heard these numbers, I remember thinking, how did they manage to abduct more than 5,000 men in such a short period of time? But people I know in the West Bank right now just told me how they're doing it. By tricking Palestinian men who are desperate for work, telling them that they're gonna get some sort of work and get paid, but they're actually just getting kidnapped and tortured and killed. So not a lot of people know this, but Palestinians in the West Bank are often the day laborers in Israel. Israel issues short-term work permits, or tasrih, to Palestinians in the West Bank that allows them to leave the West Bank and enter Israel for work. Not to help the Palestinians, but to provide cheap labor for the Israelis. They know that due to Israel's apartheid system, it's difficult for Palestinians in the West Bank to find work. So they exploit these Palestinians and use them as cheap laborers in Israel to benefit the Israeli population. Now, after October 7th, Israel essentially shut down the West Bank and Palestinians were restricted from moving or leaving their towns, which means they weren't able to work, especially those who were working in Israel. So at that point, all these Palestinian men were just sitting around with no work, unable to provide for their families. Eventually, Israel began advertising saying that we are going to allow 8,000 Palestinians in the West Bank to cross into Israel and find work. That if you have a tasrih, a work permit, which a lot of them do, we're now allowing you to cross into Israel, up to 8,000 of y'all. Mind you, a lot of these men are dying to work. They're trying to support and feed their families. So despite what's happening in Gaza, they're still willing to go to Israel to find work. The way it works is that they go to the border between the West Bank and Israel, they go through a checkpoint, they get cleared by Israel with their work permit, and then once they're cleared, right outside of the checkpoint, there's an area where the men will go stand, waiting for Israelis to come and offer them work. And it's not some formalized system, it's literally just an open area where any Israeli can drive up and say, I need 1 or 5 guys for a job that I need, whether it's a day job or a 2-month program. But even if they get hired for a longer project, every night they go back to the West Bank. So they're going back and forth every single day. Now, regarding the abductions and the kidnappings, apparently Israel put out that ad, and once the Palestinian men started making their way to Israel, Israelis began telling the men, I have work for you. And when they accept and get in their car, they abduct them and start torturing them. It's been a few weeks now since they put out that ad for the 8,000, and since then, a lot of Palestinian women have not heard from their husbands, their fathers, their sons who went into Israel and haven't returned. They usually come back every night, but some of them haven't heard back in weeks. No phone call, no text, nothing from them. And they found out that this was happening because the men who were being released and were returning to the West Bank told everyone there that they're being told they're getting hired for a job, but actually being abducted, taken to a place to be tortured and beaten by Israelis. And some, not just tortured, but actually killed, and they don't know where the bodies are. They're saying that that's one of the main ways Israel was able to abduct 5,000 plus people within a few weeks time span. And this is happening under Israel's apartheid system, so they obviously don't have any police or any military to report these things to. There's no system protecting these people. There's no way for them to inquire about where their loved ones are. Their families are just sitting there waiting for them to return, hopefully alive. I did see yesterday that something similar to this was happening in Gaza, and that Palestinians returned to Gaza, explaining that Israel is kidnapping these men and torturing them and even tagging them with numbers. I don't know if what's happening to the ones in Gaza is all part of the same plan as the ones in the West Bank. I've just been told by someone that I know that there was an ad that went up in the West Bank asking for 8,000 men, and a lot of them have not returned. And what's so disturbing about this is that they're taking Palestinian men who are desperate for work, tricking them to thinking, I finally got it, I'm gonna be able to take care of my family, and actually being taken into some room to be beaten and tortured. The fact that there are people out there who are capable of doing that, that's just like unfathomable. And what makes it even worse is that none of these Israelis are going to be held accountable for their actions. They're torturing people and they're not going to be jailed. They're not going to be disciplined by some Israeli system. It's just going to happen, and it ends there. So please, alongside Gaza, please keep an eye out on what's happening. Make sure you're following the accounts like Eye on Palestine and Quds Network to be updated, and we just gotta keep praying that Allah's with the people of Palestine. Anyone else notice the drastic difference in how Israelis handle hostages versus how Palestinians handle hostages? It's really telling of who the oppressor is. Israeli hostages that were released by Palestinians, they talked about how they were fed, their space was kept clean, they were given medical attention, the women were given hygiene products. They all said the same thing, that when they were first captured, the Palestinians told them, we're Muslim, we're not going to hurt you. And that's not coming from us, that came from Israeli hostages who were released. That's what they said about how they were treated. And then on the complete other side of the spectrum, you see how Israel handles Palestinian hostages. Without testimonies, just looking at footage shot and posted by Israeli occupation forces, boasting about how they're brutally and violently torturing Palestinians, proudly posting about this on social media like this is a game. They're blindfolded, they're stripped nude, they're beaten, they're kicked around, stacked on top of each other. And I know some people are going to say, oh, well, this is in response to the Palestinians taking the Israeli hostages. No, my dear. Before October 7th, there were more than 5,000 Palestinians being held hostage by Israel, most of whom suffering the same brutality that the new hostages are suffering. Since 1967, more than 800,000 Palestinians have been detained by Israel. So prior to October 7th, there were more than 5,000 Palestinians being held hostage. Since October 7th until now, another 5,000 have been kidnapped by Israel, most of whom are in the West Bank, where Hamas is not present, for those of y'all who want to bring that up. And this is all in reference to how Israel holds live Palestinians hostage. We haven't even brought up how they hold dead Palestinian bodies hostage. They hold dead Palestinian bodies and refuse to give them back to their families so that they can bury them, often to harvest organs belonging to these Palestinians. If and when they return the bodies, the Palestinian families will find a massive cut down the chest with organs missing. This is a very common, well-known practice that Israel partakes in. So keep in mind the order of events, which one came first, and recognize the difference between the two parties. You'll very clearly see who's the colonizer and who's the colonized.
As many of you might have heard by now, there are mass arrests happening all throughout the West Bank. I just got word from friends that work in humanitarian organizations about the torture that is happening in the prisons. One of the main reasons that Israel is inflicting horror in these prisons is a way to get Hamas to surrender. The Palestinians that are arrested and are experiencing torture 24/7 include men, women, and children. They are experiencing unimaginable acts of violence. Women are being threatened with rape. Children are being threatened to be set on fire. They are sleep deprived. They are not giving them food. They are not giving them water. If they do give them food, it's the bare minimum just to keep them alive. They have no access to lawyers or speaking to their family. There is no reason that the IDF has given these Palestinians as to why they are arresting them. Palestine has no army. There's no one coming to save them. I don't know what to tell you guys, but I felt that I should share this information just to let you know that what's happening to Palestinians is an injustice. It's an injustice to us all, and they don't deserve this. Believing that Israel has the right to defend themselves and Palestinians don't. Believing that Israel needs to take out Hamas, but like the IDF, who is committing acts of violence on Palestinians for no reason, gets to be humanized and gloated for the world and in front of the world. Yeah, shit is so fucked up. I don't think people even can begin to understand how triggered Arabs and Muslims are right now globally because of what's happening in Gaza. And this has a lot to do with the propaganda that happened after 9/11. And it was to basically attack Islam and Muslims. And it made the public feel like Islam and Muslims were scary and that they needed to be tamed, and that we needed to go to war in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and that we were going to save those people from these radicals. And in reality, none of those things ever happened. We just completely destroyed those countries, their infrastructure, their way of life, their homes. We killed their families. If seeing the images of what's happening in Gaza, think about all the stuff that we did not see happening in Afghanistan and in Iraq, right? That's all I can think about is like the millions of people that died in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we never saw what happened down there. And this is pretty much what Julian Assange was trying to tell us. He's a whistleblower, if you do not know, and he was basically trying to tell Americans that, like, listen, the American government is committing war crimes in Iraq. And because the propaganda was so good and they had everyone believing that, you know, Iraq and Afghanistan deserved it, people really didn't care. And because of this, millions of innocent people died. And at the end of all of this, what happened to Iraq? What happened to Afghanistan? Both countries are failed states. America did nothing for them. What ended up happening was that the U.S. and NATO countries used Afghanistan and Iraq to launder money. They used Iraq for their oil. And now no one really knows what was successful about these wars. The war was happening in the Middle East, but there was a persecution of Muslims happening in all these Western countries where they were surveillancing Muslim communities. They were questioning Muslims. They were imprisoning Muslim men. And because people felt like, Islam and Muslim men were the root cause of all evil, they kind of allowed all of this to happen. And when you ask the average American why 9/11 happened, their response was always, they hate us because we're free. They really thought that, they really think, it's not even thought, they really think that 9/11 happened because people believed they were free. And why did we go into war with Afghanistan? Majority of the 9/11 bombers were from Saudi Arabia. None of the dots connected with 9/11. And I think right now, Muslims and Arabs are seeing the same thing happen. And we know what this means. And they're going to try to use Islam and Muslims again to start a war. And I think people are not having it. And they're really triggered. And right now we're seeing an uprising of these communities. Back in 2020, there was a Black TikToker that taught me about something called butt breaking. And it was basically a form of punishment that a slave master would perform on a slave. And oftentimes it would be the slave that was the strongest or the most defiant. And they would rape them in front of all the other slaves, including the slave's family. And this was not just a form of punishment, but it was to dehumanize and humiliate the slave so that all the other slaves would dare not to rebel or be defiant. After I learned about this, it has always haunted me because it's so vile and disgusting. But today, seeing what's happening in Gaza, it makes me realize that that type of form of punishment still exist. It's just evolved in a different way. That dehumanization and humiliation of a group of people it still exists. So when we see, Israel bomb a school and then a video circulates of children's bodies cut in half, when we see a man pick up his children's remains and put it into plastic bags, when we see a baby only months old and come out of the rubble dead, that dehumanization and humiliation isn't reserved just for an adult. It's reserved down to a child, a Palestinian child. And we have to question this type of punishment, right? Because it is not at all human. This type of punishment at the root is white supremacy. Butt breaking was always white supremacy. This type of form of punishment is also white supremacy, and it is funded by white supremacists like the US, like the European Union, like Canada. And the difference today is that white supremacists have their own slaves that they own, that are people of color, that help them commit these types of acts of violence. And that is people like Rishi Sunak, Viola Davis, LeBron James. These are people of color that co-sign white supremacy because they paid them, And when we see this type of dehumanization and humiliation of Palestinians, it sends a message. One, it's to desensitize the world. It's to publicly humiliate Palestinians for being defiant, for resisting the occupation, for physically resisting the occupation. It is to send a message to all the Arabs in that region to say, don't you dare ever try us. It's to send the message that we own you. We are here and you are here. And this is one of the reasons, this is the main reason why the global South is disgusted, because we realize that colonization and white supremacy has never left. It has still existed. It has just been masked all along.
This is America. Don't catch you slipping now. Don't catch you slipping now. Look what I'm whipping now. This is America. Don't catch you slipping now. Don't catch you slipping now. Look what I'm whipping now. This is America. Don't catch you slipping now. Look how I'm living now. Police be tripping now. Yeah, this is America. Guns in my area. I got the strap. I gotta carry 'em. Yeah, I'ma go into this. Yeah, this is gorilla. Yeah, I'ma go get the bag. Yeah, or I'ma get the pad. Yeah, I'm so cold like yeah. I'm so dull like yeah. We gon' blow like yeah.
I'm inside Al-Shifa hospital right now. It's really crowded. It's full of people who evacuated, thinking it's a safe place. There are also wounded and injured people inside, and ambulance cars carrying more injured people or carrying martyrs who got killed. But after the Israelis bombed Al-Mamadani or Al-Ahli hospital yesterday, I don't think hospitals are even a safe place anymore.
Hi everyone, this is Bisam from Gaza. I'm still alive. These are the updates until 6 p.m. at 24th of October. So yesterday I posted a video and it was without voice. The sound was deleted, and I was talking about at the beginning of this escalation, about 100 people, 100 Palestinians were murdered. Okay. Then after a day, then after 2 weeks, about 440 people were killed a day. Then today we are talking about more than 700 people to be killed just in the previous 24 hours. Just in 24 hours, more than 700 people are killed. The number of people killed a day is increasing a day after day. And by the way, most of them are children and women. Now we're talking about 5,700 people were killed during 18 days. 2,500 are children. More than 1,300 are women. The hospitals today, the Ministry of Health was talking about that the hospitals are collapsing, especially in the northern areas of Gaza Strip, without fuel and without other supplies. At 12 a.m. They dropped white phosphorus. I'm walking while carrying a wet cloth so I can wash my nose and my eyes, because they dropped white phosphorus. I saw it, I heard the voice, the sound, I heard everything. And by the way, they're using new weapons on us. They're trying new weapons on us. We're not used to all these types. We, as experienced in the bombing, know some weapons, know some bombs, know some war plans, but these all are new. They are used tonight, especially tonight. And there are news that the Israeli army are now inside Gaza, on ground, from Beit Hanun city in the north, and from Brej refugee camp in the east. And this is another crime. This is a war crime. This is against international law. This is against everything, as the occupation itself is. But they are committing more and more crimes in the dark without anybody to notice anything. So Dahman and I we're making a video with a doctor, and she gave us some bread for her family. So we're gonna give this bread for her family near to Shifa hospital. And while we were walking, and we're still walking, many people are asking us, from where do you get this bread? Because the bakeries are closing. There's no bread in the whole Gaza city. And that's why people are trying, walking in the streets to find any bakery opening. Unfortunately, there is no fuel. There is no resources, there's no wheat. So people are eating anything except bread now. We're trying to make rice.
Hello everybody, today is Monday, November 6, 2023 at around 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and here are some of the latest updates coming out of Gaza. The Palestine Ministry of Health officially updated the death toll this morning, and unfortunately it has now exceeded 10,000 people killed since October 7th, with 10,022 officially. 4,104 of those martyrs are children, and 152 of those 10,000 were killed in the West Bank, which again is outside of Gaza. Yesterday, for the third time, all telecommunications were cut throughout the Gaza Strip, and today they have been gradually regaining connection, according to Paltel, which is the company that oversees telecommunications in Palestine. We have been seeing rising violence, abductions, arrests, and killings happening in the West Bank, both by the hands of the Israeli military and Israeli settlers. And at least 70 Palestinians were arrested overnight in raids throughout the West Bank, including in Ramallah, Hebron, Kalkilia, Nablus, and the Shuafat refugee camp. One of the individuals arrested overnight included Palestinian activist and icon Ahad Tamimi, who has been arrested shortly after her father was arrested earlier this week. This is not the first time she has been targeted and arrested by the Israeli military, although we are unsure why she was arrested last night. For some alarming and important updates that happened yesterday, Israel's Jerusalem Affairs and Health Minister said that dropping a nuclear weapon in the Gaza Strip is, quote, an option, end quote, also stating in the same radio interview that there are, quote, no non-combatants in Gaza. Also stating in the same radio interview about the citizens of Gaza that they can, quote, go to Ireland or deserts. The monsters in Gaza should find a solution by themselves, end quote. Footage from the ground yesterday showed large amounts of white phosphorus being dropped in the area, which again, I will remind you all, is in violation of international law. Yesterday, an Israeli airstrike also attacked and hit a civilian car in South Lebanon, killing 3 children that were riding inside and injuring their mother. And also 2 UNRWA schools were attacked and killed at least 35 people, including children. Yesterday, officials in Gaza also invited international media and the UN to to come investigate their hospitals to prove that they are not bases for the resistance, which I have no words to describe how that makes me feel. Yesterday, Israel also released thousands of Palestinians who were illegally imprisoned and tortured after October 7th. I had reported on this in one of my updates, saying that thousands of them went missing just mysteriously and no one knew where they were. They were released yesterday and have been saying what has happened to them, which included torture of being beaten and captured, having food and water withheld from them. They were also tagged on their wrists and ankles with serial numbers. Upon being let go, were not given any of their belongings back and were forced to walk back to where they were captured from. These were all Palestinian workers with permits to work in Israel, and they all largely work in high-risk, low-wage jobs. And for our last update coming out of yesterday, Jordanian Air Forces dropped aid into Gaza from the air, which Israel is claiming that it helped coordinate. Which now brings us back to today's news. About 12 hours ago, the Al-Shifa hospital announced that it will shut down if it does not receive shipments of fuel, which again has been being withheld from entering the area. Very few shipments of aid have been allowed into the border, and none of that has included fuel, which has been asked for on a complete loop by those, especially those who are medical staff, saying that if they do not have fuel, then their hospitals will not be able to run. And I'd like to remind you all that 16 hospitals in Gaza Strip, which makes up about 46% of hospitals in the entire strip, are no longer functioning due to those reasons. An estimate of about 40,000 people are seeking refuge and medical attention in the Al-Shifa hospital, one of the largest hospitals in the entirety of the strip. About 2 hours ago, the Palestine Red Crescent made an appeal to international health and relief organizations for aid, stating in their warning that the Al-Quds hospital will run out of fuel in 48 hours. And this cry for help shortly followed airstrikes hitting the vicinity of the hospital, causing damage to the infrastructure and in addition causing injuries in the area. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres described Gaza as, quote, becoming a graveyard for children, end quote. And director of a children's hospital, Dr. Hussein Abu Safia, told Al Jazeera that children make up 70% of the victims of the Israeli airstrikes and that they will need intensive psychological therapy and help at the end of whenever this ends. The El Auda hospital has also put out a statement saying that it is facing a shutdown if fuel is not resupplied. And in general, we have seen that notion repeated with all of the hospitals in the area. They are not receiving fuel, so they will no longer be able to function. In a press conference held today, a spokesperson for the Ministry of Health in Gaza has stated that the Cancer Center and the Specialized Children's Center of the El Ratizi Hospital were targeted twice by Israeli airstrikes, and in addition that Israel has conducted 18 attacks in the past hours. Also, since October 7th, 192 medical staff have been killed and 32 ambulances destroyed by the Israeli military. He also noted that bakeries being targeted and attacked by airstrikes has exacerbated the hunger problem in the area. Several cases of diseases, including respiratory infections, diarrhea, chickenpox, and more have been reported within UNRWA shelters, and they also released some other alarming figures stating that out of the 1.5 million people displaced in Gaza right now, that 717,000 are sheltering in 149 UNRWA facilities, 122,000 in hospitals, churches, and public buildings, 110,000 people in non-UNRWA schools, and the rest just residing amongst host families and in general unsafe areas throughout Gaza. Today, Al-Shifa's solar panel system was targeted and hit by airstrikes. Israel is claiming that it was not them, but again, truly cannot name who else it would be. It's additionally important to note that Palestinians with disabilities are being disproportionately affected by the attacks in Gaza, and that they make up 15% of those displaced. The U.S. is planning to send precision bombs worth $230 million to Israel, and the Committee to Protect Journalists has warned that this has been the deadliest 4-week period for journalists covering the conflict since they began documenting fatalities in 1992. With 36 journalists having been killed since October 7th, and in addition, their families being targeted and killed as well. 36 only includes those journalists themselves. And lastly, 5 Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces in the West Bank, and they are 25-year-old Ezzedine Awad, 22-year-old Jihad Shahada, 20-year-old Qassam Rajab, 20-year-old Momen Balawi, 18-year-old Yusuf Tahada, and additionally a 14-year-old was shot in the back, seeking medical treatment right now, although I have seen that he is currently stable. I would like to remind you all that these are only a few of the updates coming out of the area, those which I found most important and picked out and chose myself. There's still tons of other news happening constantly and tons more just occurring in general that I didn't report on now. If there's anything important that you think I've missed in this update, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. And in addition, any other suggestions that you might have for these video updates or for making content in general about this issue. In my bio, you will find a link tree with over 20 links that you can engage with to help support Gaza in your own way, whether it be from education to advocacy to protests to boycotting, anything that you can think of, I've tried to link to in here to make these resources accessible to you all. If there are any other resources that you think I should include in that link tree, please comment them down below and I will do my best to add them all. And additionally, I will say that I am doing more frequent updates on my Instagram stories, so you can follow me on there if you want more frequent updates in general. That has been the end of my updates for today. While they are heartbreaking, I want to remind you to please remain steadfast in your support and advocacy for this issue. This is the time where we need to be making the most noise, to be transforming our pain and our grief into action. I'll see you guys in the next update, and from the river to the sea.
I've gotten so many messages and comments of people losing their minds that I am Palestinian and gay, and they love to tell me all of the terrible graphic things that will happen to me if I ever go to Palestine for being gay. And all of these things are baseless, racist lies, right? It's just this colonizer mentality that you believe that the occupied is savage and barbaric. I always think it's so interesting these people position themselves as pro-gay when they're spending their time harassing queer Palestinians. And this had me reflecting on an experience I had in college. I was probably 19 years old and I was working as a freshman orientation leader. So I was standing on campus in my fucking khakis and blue polo, and this woman approached me, and I guess someone had told her that I was Palestinian. She immediately launched into this incredibly bizarre speech about Israel and her trips there and how she has family there. And I'm 19 at my job, so I'm like, cool, can I help you register your student for any classes? Like, I'm so not here to talk about this, and I'm so not paid enough to care. But then she turned it into, you're gay, they would kill you there, they would push you off a building, they would stone you to death. And like, this grown woman is saying these things to me at my job, and I just have to smile and be polite. But it's so laughable to adopt this false sense of moral superiority. Like, I really care about gay people when you are literally making me so uncomfortable at my job, when you're harassing a kid about their sexuality and their ethnicity in public. Any attempt to weaponize queerness against Palestinians is so completely devoid of logic, it's laughable. Israeli missiles do not swerve away from queer bodies. As a queer Palestinian, the major barrier to my happiness is not homophobia, it's the carpet bombing. Yeah, it'd be cool to get married in Palestine someday. It'd also be cool if any of the buildings were left standing. That's why that Hamara, Miriam Hart, kissing her girlfriend at the Palestine rally and pretending like she's doing something bothers me so much. We don't give a shit. There's no anesthesia in our hospitals. White queer people's ability to center themselves and their hypothetical oppression in a place that they will never go is so astounding to me, and I really need the junior varsity team to internalize for one god-blessed second that not everything is about you. Allyship 101, if you claim to care about a group of people, listen to that group of people. If you claim to care about queer people in Palestine, listen to queer Palestinians. And there's a queer Palestinian telling you you are a brainless genocide apologist with a tragic haircut. You clearly lack the range, sit this one out, Shirley. Queer Palestinians are advocating for a free Palestine. You do not know what is better for us than we do. Sending me messages detailing the violent wet dreams you have about what will happen to my body if I go to Palestine just reveals that you're a violent racist. It doesn't reveal you know anything about queer liberation, much less Palestinian liberation. Palestinians are so homophobic. Yeah? Your dad blew me in Ramallah and everyone clapped, so maybe they just don't like you. Ya khanzir.
What are the key differences between a neoliberal form of self-care and a radical form of self-care? A neoliberal form of self-care says, I need to turn away, turn my phone off, completely disconnect, dissociate, and detach in order to protect myself and self-soothe, even when there are atrocious forms of violence that are being committed against communities, specifically the Palestinian community right now. Neoliberal forms of self-care is what is uplifted in Western mental health right now. It is centering individual mental health and individual trauma in the face of varying forms of collective trauma that we are witnessing at this time. Radical self-care tells us that I take care of myself, my soul, my mind, my body, so that I can show up in community. Because when I resist against a capitalist system that tells Black and brown bodies that we need to burn out in order to be useful, we are perpetuating the same forms of repression that we are actively resisting against. Because self-care and community care go hand in hand.
I'm not the first person to say this, and I won't be the last, but the fact that in order to stand with Palestine and stand against genocide and apartheid and ethnic cleansing and all of these things and occupation and settler colonialism and blockades and sieges and bombings and raids, you have to say, oh, but I'm not anti-Semitic. It is such a diabolical, accomplishment of Western and Israeli media that they've constructed this narrative that to be against the state of Israel and its military actions and its violence and its creation of prisons and its creation of literally stealing people's land and, terrorizing them for their whole lives, bombing them, that I have to say, but I'm not anti-Semitic. It is so dehumanizing. It's so disrespectful to the faith of Judaism. And I'm so grateful to all the people, Jewish people, who are telling us this is not Judaism and Zionism are not the same. And it also makes us have to decenter Palestinian voices, because now we have to defer to Jewish people across the world to tell us, oh, it is okay to support Palestine. And it's no,
I saw a post from someone living inside Gaza yesterday that said that their mother goes to sleep every night with her hijab on so that if a bomb falls on their house, she'll be fully covered when they pull her out of the rubble. And it made me think of a post on Twitter I saw from a girl who grew up in occupied Iraq that said the US Army would come into their home unannounced so often that her mother and grandmother started wearing the hijab around the house 24/7, even when they were sleeping. And this made me think about how we don't consider one of the biggest losses that the Palestinian people are facing right now is their peace. Imagine the President of the United States going on live television and saying that you may be faking the death of your children, the death of your husband, the death of your mom, the death of your dad. Think about all the Middle Eastern countries that have been invaded by oppressors like America and Israel. These people have lived their entire lives in fear. And you want to sit in your comfortable US apartment and say that these people deserve this? Peace is something that the Palestinians were never allowed to have since the creation of Israel 75 years ago. Even for the Palestinians in the United States, not knowing if you're going to be able to get a job, not knowing if you're going to be able to speak against what's happening in your country, not knowing which of your friends are supporting the genocide of your people. So think about that next time you want to say that you don't know enough to speak about it. Think about if you lived somewhere where you didn't know whether or not you'd wake up the next morning, and then someone across the world was saying they didn't know enough to have an opinion.
If you really want to understand what's going on in Congo, you have to understand its place on the map. The 1884 Berlin Conference was when a bunch of colonizers sat together and decided to split up Africa depending on their needs, without a single African person in sight. This is why you may have noticed these weirdly straight lines that you don't really see in other continents. And down here we have Congo. This is Belgian King Leopold II, okay? Stay with me here. Unlike other European powers, this was not colonization. Congo was not a colony. This man privately owned the region. The audacity! He promised he was establishing it for humanitarian and scientific purposes, and he promised to bring civilization to the region. Spoiler, he was in it for the money, and he wanted to line his own pockets. He ended up being known for extreme brutality, enslaving the entire population for ivory and rubber. Half the entire Congolese population died either because of extreme brutality or because of starvation and malnutrition. Just so you have an idea of how badly they messed up the region, and the Dominican Republic of Congo gained their independence in 1960. Just to put how recent that is into perspective, George Clooney, Tom Cruise, Will Smith are born in the 1960s. Denzel Washington, Tom Hanks, born before the 1960s. Experts say that they left the country so messed up that there was little to no room for any improvement. Congo's already divided, they immediately break out into civil wars, but we look down here, we have Angola. Are you still with me? Okay, watch this. During the Cold War, capital city of Congo backs up the rebels in Angola. Who also doesn't like the Soviet-backed Angolan government? The USA. And America pours in weapons and arms into the Dominican Republic of Congo. This messes up the region so much more. Now you see the itty-bitty-ish country over here, this is Rwanda. Now again, because of Belgian colonization, you have the 1994 Rwanda genocide where 1/10 of the entire population is killed. Stay focused, we're almost there. The Rwanda genocide is when the Tutsi, an ethnic minority, is being slaughtered by the Hutu militia. And this genocide spreads to the eastern part of Congo. They also joined the Dominican Republic of Congo's army to kill Congolese Tutsis. What you have is Rwanda and Ugandan armies backed up by Eritrea and Eritrea, who fight the militias in Congo and blah blah blah. Long story, they overthrow the government. I don't want you to forget how rich Congo is in its natural resources, right? Diamonds, gold, silver, zinc, copper, cobalt, magnesium, you name it. To get this really big region with no proper power or authority to defend itself, and countries abroad who already feel entitled to Africa's resources are first in line to gladly exploit them. Bro, Congo has been through so much, and it's just one example how the artificially drawn lines of the African map and colonization leaves a history that continues to haunt the region. In the past few days alone, Israel has carried out some of the most barbaric airstrikes. We're talking elementary schools, hospitals, ambulances, refugee camps, anything and everything that Palestinian civilians rely on for safety. But they're only doing it because there's suspected Hamas bases. Like, you don't get it. What else do we do when there's a criminal on the loose? You nuke the whole city, that's what I'm saying! Because Israel is not a terrorist state. Here are some other things they did because of Hamas. For example, Israel funded the 1994 Rwanda genocide, where 1/10 of the population were slaughtered. Funded apartheid South Africa, supporting and siding with the all-white government against the native black population. These are the Rohingya people, a predominantly Muslim ethnic minority facing genocide and ethnic cleansing in Myanmar right now. Displaced Rohingya people make up the largest stateless population in the world, and guess who they're funded by? Israel. The graves of the 1995 Srebrenica massacre, over 8,000 killed. And really, I can keep going, but can you not spot the common denominator? Can you not spot the pattern? I'll give you a clue, because it's not Hamas. And the truth is, even if we ignore Palestine, Hamas or not, ceasefire or not, Israel remains a state that thrives off war. Israel is one of the largest exporter of weapons in the world. Its economy dangerously depends on weapons, and they thrive off Palestinian casualties. That's where they test their weapons. Zionists love to boast about how the IDF is one of the strongest militaries in the world, and it's absolutely true. But what you don't want to acknowledge is that regardless of Hamas, this is a state that depends on violence. It craves massacres, it craves genocides. Look at how much money they made off the Ukrainian war. Israel is a state that thrives and will continue to thrive off bloodshed. What else do we do when there's a criminal on the loose? You nuke the whole city, that's what I'm saying. Oh my god, that was like an exaggerated skit. I wake up this morning, I read the news. I was joking. I was kidding.
I'm gonna need you to spare 1 minute of your life to listen to this press conference held by the Palestinian children of Gaza, who are inviting us to protect their lives that we are destroying. They filmed this in English, just for us. We are the audience. That means it is our responsibility to make sure everybody watches this and does something. Listen to every word.
The 7th of October, we face extermination, killing, bombing falling over our heads. All of this of front of the world. They lie to the world that they kill the parties, but they kill the people of Gaza, their dreams and their future. Kids of Gaza run out of death once and once. We come to Al-Shifa hospital to keep us from bombing. We suddenly run out of death more after bombing the hospital. The occupation is starving us. We don't find water, food, and we drink from the unusable water. We come now to shout and invite you to protect us. We want to live, we want peace, we want to judge the killers of children. We want medicine, food, and education. And we want to live as the other children live.
Did you get all that? Now go take this anger, sadness, everything you're feeling, and do something. People are shutting down weapons factories. There's a lot we can do. They're inviting us to protect their lives.
Don't forget that it's not just about free Palestine, but the Palestine that's freeing us along the way.